So I was talking to my friend, you might know him, Christopher Talon, on the phone yesterday. Today for me is Tuesday. When you hear this, it'll be Wednesday, so tomorrow. So it'll be 2 days ago from now when I'm recording this. I was talking to him, and we were just, kind of going over bookish things, sales, marketing, our hopes and dreams for the future, possible baby names if either of us ever has a kid again. Actually, I can't have kids, so if I have a kid, it would be through adoption. And as much as I really support adoption, I will never adopt a kid. You can bank on that right now. Put that in the bank and believe in it. So anyways, we're talking, and we get to this point in the conversation where he was at the library doing some things, and he talked to a librarian and thanked him for letting him use the space. And one thing led to another, and they decided to feature his book on their shelves, and they were going to recommend it to the other libraries in the system. And I said, that's really cool. I said, I live in a small town, and just recently had to go down to my library, and in order to get my book in the library, I had to donate it. And I said, you know what? It's embarrassing being an author sometimes, because it's not like I just worked the last 5 years to write The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi. No, not at all. I didn't wait for 3 years to get an agent so that I could get into a major publishing house, only to decide that I'd failed and self-published the novel and already feel embarrassed because of that. But now I have to give the damn thing away for free so that my library will stock it. And I bet you if I went, nobody has it checked out right now. I'm in that kind of a mood. But if you're an author and you're not super duper excited about your sales prospects, just know we're all there with you. And over the weekend, I sold 45 books. So, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 45 books. So I'm complaining, and maybe I have no right to. But I just want to share that this is an upsy downsy kind of thing. And, hang in there. Fight the good fight. Make waves. Don't give up. Because after the embarrassment, listen, Stephen King, I haven't mentioned him in a while on this podcast. He threw the manuscript of Carrie away. Legend has it. And that his wife, Tabby, had to go retrieve it out of the trash can. She read through it. She thought it was worth saving. And boom, look what happened. So you may be at a point where you're ready to just toss it in the trash. Don't do it. Or do it if you have somebody who loves you enough to undo it. It can be embarrassing, but listen, hear me out here. It's good. It's the good kind of embarrassment that builds character, I'm pretty sure. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to die a failure because I'm not going to quit. And neither should you. All right. Here is the episode that I was interviewed on Creative Ops, Christopher Talon's podcast. If I haven't already kind of connected all the threads here, he interviewed me not long ago. I was on his podcast. He aired it, and now I'm bringing it to you as an episode of TRBM. If you like what you hear, you're going to like the rest of Creative Ops because Chris has a very unique and skilled way of interviewing people. He gets some pretty fun, meandering conversations. I will warn you that I do not talk about my book as much as I should have. It was an interesting time in my life. There were some personal things going on that specific day. I was actually speaking to him in my van at a Target parking lot so that I had good Wi-Fi because I was otherwise indisposed for the day, but it was really important that I get on that podcast and spend that time talking, and it was good. It was a good thing to do. Okay, that's what I've got for you. Buy a copy of The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi. I'll have links in my show notes as always. If you're not subscribed to this show via Substack, you're missing out on 97% of what's best about the podcast. Share it with a friend. You know you can do that. All you have to do is just click the little arrow dealy and you just share it with a friend. Send them an email, send them a text message. Be like, hey, I love this podcast. You're going to love it too. Share it with your boss. Let them know that they can invest in me as a company and that I will be bankable. Share it with Wall Street if you know somebody or your rich uncle. Share this everywhere you can. Rate and review the podcast, the books. Just say, man, TRBM is awesome and get it out there to the world. That would be super helpful, especially if you're listening and you want to bank on the future of this very bankable show and the author who hosts it. Buy my books. Did I say that already? Buy them. Do it. I'd love that. And stay safe out there. Lots of love to you. And yeah, here we go.
All right. I don't do this for anybody else, but I'll do it for you. Do you consent to be recorded and all that shit?
No, I do not. You may not use this audio. Yeah, of course I do.
Welcome to Creative Ops, a podcast for creative people.
Hello, everybody. Christopher Tallon here, host of Creative Ops, maker of all the music, and author of a fantastic little sci-fi novel called Switchers, about kids in 1996 who get stuck in a time travel war against their adult selves, and when they time travel, they switch bodies. Switchers. Link in bio. All right, everybody. I have Jody Sperling on the show today. He's been on here before, and I've been on his podcast before. But when he was on this one before, he was here with Kenny McKay, and they were talking specifically about marketing. This time, we're talking more about writing, because Jody has a couple of books out now. He's got the 7-Figure Mindset for the Writer's 7. I'll edit it in post, or maybe I won't. He's got a book about marketing books. And then he's also got a couple of novels out. So we're talking about those novels that he's got out there now. I just finished reading The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi, and it is fantastic. I highly recommend. I believe there's also audiobooks out or coming out soon. Anyway, go to Jody's website, jodyjsperling.com. All the links will be in the show notes for that. Yeah, because if you are a writer, he's got a book for you. If you're just a casual reader, he's got some books for you too. Yeah, nice guy. Nebraskan, but we won't hold that against him. Jody J. Sperling.
Getting reviews is a total shit show. It's unbelievable how hard it is to get somebody to leave a review. You're like, hey, listen, all you have to do is be like, I read this book and I enjoyed it. And that review helps algorithms so much. But no matter how many people you tell that to, they're like, oh yeah, no, your book was great. And I'm like, literally just copy and paste that and put it in a review. And they're like, I'll do it. I'll definitely do it. I'll get to it. They sent you the link. I told you what to do. And you will not leave the review. Come on, Dad. I'm looking for you, man.
Yeah. Well, I left your book before I finished it. I didn't want to finish it today because I wanted to talk to you, and then I wanted to finish it because I don't like. I've done this once before where I interviewed somebody after I read the entire book, and then the whole time I was sitting there going like, okay, well, I can't ask about this, and I can't say, well, how did you connect this, because then that would ruin it for the reader. So I stopped, like, just sort of. I can't remember. I think between 75 and 80% of the book.
Yeah.
So where I stopped is where Luke is just getting out of the hospital and is kind of starting to piece things together in a way that she hadn't before. So I can say that. I don't think that's a big spoiler.
No, it's not. Yeah.
When people get there, they'll be like, oh, okay, I know exactly what part of the book he's talking about. But yeah, let's get into talking about the book. It's the 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi.
Yes, sir.
And are there 9 parts to the book?
Yeah, there are 9 parts. Yep.
Okay, because I've got the ebook, so I haven't been able to like flip easily and look at everything the way that I normally do with a book, a paperback.
Yeah.
So each part then is a life.
Yes, each part is a life.
Okay. How much of the book do you figure out before you even start writing, or are you? I know we've talked about this before, but let's go over it again for people that haven't heard your take on how you do it.
Yep.
Do you try to kind of outline a big picture of what the whole book looks like, or are you kind of a write as you go guy?
Before the work that I'm doing right now, I've always been, I hate the term pantser. I wish it could be eliminated from everybody's brain. But because it's so many writers will know that term, that's what I do, or have done for all of my life. Is I write the book.
I got to say this real quick. I just got to say real quick. For anybody who's like, does he not know what that word is? Because I've talked to a bunch of writers and I never use it for the same reason as you. I don't like it, so I just say, "Do you write as you go?" Yeah, I'm a pantser.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, good. Maybe we can start a movement together to find it like a more appropriate term. Because plotter sounds fine. Like, I mean, unless you hear it as PLODDER, and then you're not a hard way. I'm just a plotter. Kind of get along as I do. But that sounds fine. But pantser sounds like you've got an incontinence issue.
It kind of does. You're right. Like, oh gosh, we got Mr. Sperling over here. He's a total pantser. Watch this guy. You're gonna have to change him twice.
Exactly. Well, and also, I bet you, because we're close to the same age, that when we were growing up in school, somebody came and pantsed you. That was a totally different thing. I got pantsed a couple times, and it is humiliating. I didn't see it coming, though, so I guess.
Oh, man. That reminds me of a time I was a junior in high school, and my friend who was a senior, his name was Todd. We were playing shirts and skins basketball, and he was on the shirts team. And while he was waiting for a rebound, somebody pantsed him, and he didn't have any underwear on, and it was a co-ed gym class.
You're like, he switched team to skins, but he went all the way.
The good news for Todd was he's one of those guys who wouldn't be embarrassed if people saw him fully nude. So
wow.
It didn't faze him like it would have most people, but still, like, just to all of a sudden, like, somebody's going up for a rebound, and then, oh my God, there's a naked guy.
That's so amazing. Yeah, it's humiliating. There's so many stories I have about that time in my life. I was really
or grabbing a guy while he's taking a pee in a urinal and just shaking him by his hips, and then he gets pee all over the place.
Yep. I was usually on the receiving end of too many things. I was a real shy, kind of nerdy loser. So maybe I still am, but I wear my hats backwards and stuff to kind of look cool on the outside.
But you're tall. All you got to do is like make a fist, and people be like, "Uh-oh, watch out for that guy."
I found out after the fact for both undergrad and grad school that the majority of classmates were intimidated by me because I was quiet. But when I did speak, it took such an effort for me that I wanted to know I was saying something that added to the conversation. So I had this reputation of being like this real smart, quiet, intimidating character. I think that's funny about being a shy person or really leaning into believing that you're an introvert. I think that introvert thing is real. Like, I am an introvert, but also it doesn't mean you have an excuse to not talk to people. And I think you don't realize how much of your own world you're creating when you're introverted like that, when you refuse to engage with people and just be kind, I guess. Yeah. Anyways, way off subject. Sorry.
So yeah, we were saying you are not a plotter or a plotter, but more of a go where the winds take you on the day that you sit down to write.
That's right. Up to the 9 Lives of Marva DeLong High, I had never plotted anything in my life. I didn't know how to. High school outlines were like, you do Roman numeral 1, big letter A, those kind of things, and like work your way down. And I was like, my brain organizationally does not think that way. Those were always really hard for me. And so I thought of outlines as being intimidating and kind of pointless, because I was like, if I create this outline, it's going to ruin the surprise for me and I won't enjoy the writing process. And it took me, part of this is because of the way that I wrote the novel. part of this is because I think technically I wrote like 4 books to get the 9 Lives of Margaret DeLonghi. They were all the same book, but not the right book.
Yeah.
And that is true. So where some people will be like, hey, the first 4 books you write are really crappy. I think that's true. And I think that happened. It's just that in my mind, I only wrote 1 book. I just did it 5 different times to get the story I wanted. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So then, knowing that you're not I've already got the end in mind, I just got to write to it. What was that first nugget of the 9 Lives of Margaret DeLonghi in your brain where you're like, ooh, this could be interesting? What was the story as far as you saw it?
It's hard to remember back to when I visualized the repeating lives. There's a word I can't think of right now, but motif. But so the book started as I always want, and there is, I think for people who are really into it, there's a lot of political commentary. There's a lot of social commentary in the book. That's just kind of how I engage the world. I like to use novels to think about my existence and where I fit. And so there's a lot of that commentary, but the first thing I was thinking about was this thing. It was like a version of an Africanized bee. It was an Africanized lice instead that only infected the heads of women. And Lyle, who is Luke's partner in the book, was the main character. So I wrote this whole draft of a book where they were kind of searching for this medical thing. And it was fine, but it wasn't good. And but I really liked Luke. And I learned pretty quickly that she was a fun character who had a lot to say. And I remembered back to a friend I had in undergrad named Justin Carter. Shout out to you, Justin. You're a great musician and a hell of a writer. So I hope that you are still doing stuff. But he challenged me in college. He said, dude, you're such an outspoken Christian. You have this really strong worldview. Why don't you ever try to write a character who believes the exact opposite of what you do? And I had kept that rattling around in my brain. I never really even attempted it until I got to this point where I couldn't get a literary agent. I couldn't get noticed. I couldn't get published. I just was stuck. And I thought, I'm going to write a commercial book because I've never tried to write anything commercial. And I'm going to write it from the perspective of someone who's the exact opposite of me. So it's going to be a woman who's a feminist, which, I mean, let's sidebar that. That was the opposite of who I was at that time. A woman who's a feminist, who hates God, organized religion, and is really brash and all of that kind of stuff. And so that became Luke deeply. And then
don't call me sweetie and don't call other women bitches, that kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, she's very outspoken about those kind of things. And you know, she's a strong female character that taught me a lot about women, which is really interesting because the whole conversation now about own voices and not being allowed to write outside of your own experience is crazy. Because I understand my wife better. I understand women better by wrestling with Luke as a woman and kind of understanding the things that she would value. So I know this is a long roundabout way to describe what happened, but I needed a way that I could show really, really how strong she was. And yet have her be kind of like the reckless bull in a china shop kind of character, because that's who I loved. And the repeating life thing came to me that way, not actually thinking about Groundhog Day, but almost as soon as I had her die the first time, which I'd prefer to save that somewhat as a not a spoiler for people, because that first death should rock you. If it doesn't, I'm not doing my job.
Yeah, that was pretty intense. That was the one with Nellie, right?
Yeah, that's the one with Nellie.
Yeah, Nellie's intense.
Yeah. Nellie is quite intense. And so I want that to hit the reader and the reader to have to make a choice. Like, can I even carry on with this book?
Yeah.
I will spoil by saying nothing gets that intense again. Like that is by far the most like, clashing moment of the book. And it's really intentional. But when I had that,
it's like a roller coaster that starts with the big hill and then does the loop de loops and the hard turns after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I hope that works. I don't know that there's a lot of other novels that work that way. So maybe we'll see what happens. But, after that first death, I was like, this has to happen. This death was inevitable. Luke had to die, and there needs to be a justification for what's going on. And so the rest of the novel came forth out of that. And it actually went quite quickly after I got to that point.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed the process.
That's fun. Like I've done the same thing with books where, a book, but done the same thing with stories too, where you start writing something, and actually the book Switchers, not the first novel that I ever attempted to write or mostly wrote, but it was the first one where I was like, oh, this is actually good. I'm going to do a second draft. But it started with a short story that had all the main male characters, and it was a short story, and one of them commits suicide and then spends most of the story like contemplating his life in the immediate afterlife. And I was like, okay, well, this is all getting kind of convoluted and stupid, but I like these characters. And so I just kept working those characters in different stories until something stuck. Kind of like you said, you'll write something, get to a point where you're like, nope, rewrite it. Get to a point where you're like, nope, rewrite it. I didn't realize that that's what I was doing with Switchers, but that's in a sense what I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. It is interesting now that you mention that too. I don't think I even consciously picked up on this, but you and I both played with that same motif of like death and re-life. Because that's kind of a lot what Switchers is. I mean, you're switching back and forth between, your adult and your childhood self. It's so similar. It's eerie now that I'm kind of connecting those two things. There's something weird that happens. Think about the role that death has in clarifying what life is.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because when you read almost any two novels, if you've got a really firmly fixed concept in your mind, you see that in everything too. And you're like, oh, you know what? This is kind of like that other book in the sense that even though a completely outside observer would look at the two books and be like, I don't see any similarities.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Which is a really good way of you saying our books are nothing alike. And I do technically agree, but I still will stand by thinking the theme is somewhat similar.
Well, yeah, your story, without giving away too much, just a little bit of a side-by-side comparison. Mine is like, obviously things are messed up from the start and everybody knows it. Whereas yours is like, things are weird from the start, but then they just get weirder, but only one person understands it and everyone else just looks at them like they're insane.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Which is a really fun thing to play with as well. It's really,
insanity is an amazing concept for a writer, because you can play with it. Well, what if they're saying and everybody else just doesn't see what they see? Yes. I love that.
You remember that movie? Is it called no? Oh my gosh, with Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind. I was going to say A Beautiful Life. That's a totally different movie. A Beautiful Mind. I would have liked that better if they had allowed it to be fictionalized and he actually wasn't crazy. I was so into it until the moment after the shed. He goes out and he's working through all these concepts in his storage shed, and I was like, if at this moment he's actually right, I would have dug that movie so hard. But when you find out he is actually crazy, you're kind of like, well, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Crazy guy.
Yeah. And then it could have turned into a Stephen King novel, and he like tries to go back and stop Einstein from being born so they can't make the nuclear bomb.
Yes, exactly. Oh man, 11/22/63 is a great novel.
Yeah. That's one I've got to get to. I've heard so many, I've actually heard a few people say that it's their favorite one of his.
Yeah, it's up there for me, for sure.
Do you have a favorite King book? Or does it kind of vary? Like, what is it right now if you had to pick?
Oh, good question. I think it's Pet Sematary, but it's so damn close. It's really tough to say.
Pet Sematary is good.
You know what? If you do a book where it ends dismally, but you do it right, I think it's super, super satisfying. It's hard to do right. I've done it wrong a couple of times, in my humble opinion, but that one, he just nailed.
Yeah. That's a good point. And there's something it works, I think, best with horror, because the whole point with horror is like not even to necessarily be scared, just to be like deeply unsettled. Is to have that ending that doesn't make you comfortable, but makes you go, wait a minute, now what? And you're just as panicked as you were before.
Yes.
Even with a sense of closure, air quotes on the closure.
I'm sure somebody said it before you, but you nailed it in a way that I just haven't heard before. Horror isn't necessarily about scaring you. It's this sense of deeply unsettled. I've never read a Stephen King book where I was, well, not never. There's one time. And in fact, it's a book that's not even scary. Lisey's story. I was alone in a hotel in Massachusetts for work, and I was reading Lisey's story. And in the background, because I was alone in the hotel, I was playing the Beatles' White Album. And there was something about the combination of the White Album and Lisey's story. And when the main character slips into that other world, I was terrified that night. Like, I had to put the book away because there was something so scary about it. But typically when I read him, I'm not scared, but yeah, that deeply unsettled feeling is what draws me to him so much.
Yeah. I got that same feeling from, I think, the book of his that scared me the most Actually, I don't even know if I finished it. Was no, not Dolores Claiborne. The one about the nurse.
Oh yes. Oh my gosh, we call ourselves Stephen King fans. I know exactly what you're talking about, though. It'll come to me here in a second.
Misery.
Misery. Yep.
Yeah, I mean that book was aptly titled.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it was. Two. By the way, that's two books. We're not having a Stephen King podcast here, but that's two books where a main character is trapped in bed for most of the time. Because the partner book to Dolores Claiborne is also the woman is handcuffed to that bed, and so he likes making claustrophobic scenarios, and I would have such a hard time writing a book like that. I like to jump around in setting and scenery. It helps me keep the action higher or more intense.
Yeah. Well, I think what even bothered me more about the book Misery was while I was reading that, I had read something about Stephen King commenting on that book, and he said, "Oh, that book was 100% the personification of cocaine."
Yes, I do remember hearing that.
And I was just like, crazy. Oh my God. So he was exposing his internal struggle externally, and that's what he was going through, what he was going through on the inside. That's dark.
Yeah. Okay. So I would like to say this because I've actually been looking for a public place to air this grievance. And I'm somewhat outing myself. But Joe Rogan has said multiple times in the last couple of months on his podcast that Stephen King was a far superior author when he was on drugs. And I want to contradict that because, for one, he didn't start out on drugs. He started out a drinker, but most of us are drinkers. I'm a fairly heavy drinker. But he was only on like coke and the heavier stuff in the kind of early middle of his career. And I don't think that his best writing was during that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think that he's written some brilliant work post-drugs and pre-drugs.
I still think, and I don't know if I've heard anybody else say this, but I would argue that his book Revival, which is one of his more recent ones,
Oh, I love that book.
I would argue that might be his best book.
It's a good book. You are absolutely right. Now, I might be mixing up the title, but that's the one with electricity, right?
Yeah. And the pastor who basically loses his mind to reach into the afterlife to see his wife and kid who died in a drunken car crash.
Yes. Phenomenal.
Yeah. It talks about religion. It talks about power. It talks about addiction.
Yes.
Love. Yeah. It's a deep book.
Okay. I want to ask you a question. I'm curious about, in Switchers, I would say the one thing that is not at least present to me in my memory is like a love interest.
It was really small.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not like
it was the main character Kurt and then Elizabeth, the girl that wears the flowery dress, and like at the very end of the book. Spoiler alert! Don't listen to this if you don't want the spoiler. At the end of the book, she like kisses him just a little bit. Yeah. And that's the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah. So that fits my memory. I was thinking, I'm thinking about this like deep sense of love. And I'm curious about your feelings about love, because I found the more that I read, the more I realize when an author has a love interest in the book, it creates a locked in focus for me. Do you ever notice that yourself at all?
Yeah. Well, and especially going back to like a Stephen King book, you know that if they're in love but they have sex, she's gonna die. If they're in love but they don't have sex, then she might live. It's kind of like the Shakespeare. If they get married and then it continues, it's a drama or a tragedy. If they get married in the last act, then it's a comedy.
That's right. Yeah, I like it. I don't know what it is. I wouldn't have known that about myself. I always had a hard time writing about love. I have a really hard time. For as much as I love writing, I have a really hard time writing words to my wife about the way I feel about her. Maybe it's addressing it like direct on.
You're kind of like Lyle when he dies. Spoiler alert. Do not listen if you do not want a spoiler alert. But it's kind of like when Lyle says something very beautiful, one of the times that he's dying, uses his last dying breath to say something nice when usually he's very, jokily condescending in between bites of eating stuff.
Yeah.
Why does Lyle have to eat stuff constantly. I was transfixed by that immediately.
Yeah.
He's always pulling something random out of his pocket or grabbing something out of a fridge.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this actually came from, I had him eating quite a bit, but I dialed it up to like 500 after talking with my agent. She picked up the book. And like the one big thing about this book, she's like, I love it, but I'm having a hard time figuring out how to pitch it because when you first run into magic in this book, you're already close to 100 pages in. And she's like, that's a pretty big moment that if you're not grounded that there's magic here, it's a little unsettling. So I thought about different ways that I could create magic. Luke had always been drinking quite a bit of bourbon. She'd always been smoking quite a bit, but I turned up the intensity on all three of those behaviors a ton. Like I mentioned, Luke smoking so many cigarettes. If you count the number of cigarettes smoked in the book, it's like probably an ad for RJ Reynolds or something.
Yeah, and at one point she can't have a cigarette, and she's like, if I even smell cigarettes on a person, I might lick their clothes.
Yes, exactly. Which also, I mean, that does, like Stephen King's always writing about addiction because he had addiction. I'm a former smoker. I smoked for close to 20 years. So I do recognize that. Like the smell of fresh cigarettes to me is still something so tantalizing. I don't like the smell of smoke on people's clothes. So that probably is a little of me leaking into the character. But yeah, Lyle, I had so much fun with that. I was like, how far can I stretch people's credulity? Like, I think that there's one point he eats a whole fried chicken. He just pulls it out of nowhere, and you're like, where the hell was he storing a fried chicken? Like the whole thing, you know? So I had so much fun with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And he uses the food to point at people. Hey, and he's like pointing at people with the ham and cheese sandwich.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that, like, having that food there, I think you have to accept. And I've had plenty of people read it and comment and not get to the first death. And they're like, this guy's like, it's impossible that he can eat that much. And I'm like, that's the point.
Yeah.
So
it makes him fun. That and his, like just his verbal tics, the way he'll say something as a question with, huh? Even though it's not a question, he'll just like, it's an accusing thing. Like, hey, why don't you try to ruin my day, huh?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yep. He says, huh, a lot. I kind of thought about different drinking games that you could play while you're reading this book. People would get through like chapter 2 and just be like blacked out.
Yeah. Every time Lyle gets a new food out, you have to take a drink. Every time he says, huh, you have to take a drink.
Yeah.
Every time he says something demeaning to Luke, you have to take a drink.
Yeah. That's another thing I enjoy. Gender roles. And I had a friend, JP, that I went to grad school with, which, by the way, just for anybody listening, I only differentiate because, you know, they're two different schools. If you don't have a grad degree, you're better than me because I was stupid enough to pay a ton of money for something that did not my writing career chops. But JP is a really good friend of mine that I met at grad school. And he and I used to talk about gender roles all the time because while I think, expanding my understanding of women's ability to do anything and everything that men can, I still think that there's something that we should embrace that is uniquely different about men and women. That's something that's important to me. I don't mind being recorded saying that. I'm not exactly sure what those things are. From a physiological standpoint, I know that it's easier for me to build muscle than it is for a woman. I know that women need more body fat on them. They can give birth. I cannot. So like physiologically, I think I see some of those things, but I think it might play out in the way that we meet the world. And I don't know what that is, but it's something that fascinates me. And I play with that a ton between Luke and Lyle. Sometimes I think you can almost be sympathetic of his very sexist comments. And yet I think Luke really stands like true in what she says. I don't think that she's ever, quote unquote, toxic in her femininity. I think it's really real.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when she's thinking like, what a bitch, she's like, I just don't like saying it though.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So there are parts, like you've mentioned, the first death is like, that's the big hill on the ride. Once you get over that, then you can, you know, emotionally, viscerally handle the other stuff.
Yeah.
But that scene with Nellie talks about a lot of things that are very illegal and frowned upon in society. Yeah. Just writing that kind of stuff. do you feel, I don't know what the way to phrase it is. Do you feel weird at all when you write that stuff, or are you just so deep in the like, this is just art, man? Like, because when I write weird stuff like that, there's a part of me that's like, God, people are going to read this. It's okay. It's the story. The story needs this. You know what I mean? Like I do battle with writing weird stuff.
I do too. And so no, there's no part of me that's like so deep in the art that I don't realize what I'm doing. My wife to this day still says, if you'd taken that scene out, or if you'd softened it or figured a way around it, you would have gotten the deal you were looking for. And I'm not sure she's wrong. But it wouldn't be the book that it is without it. And my agent was a woman, and she was fully bought in. She did actually say at one point, like, we could think about rewriting it if you want to take one more round. And I said I was not interested in that. Which I guess is a side note. I did get an offer from a small press, but they wanted to publish spring of 2025. And I finally just thought, like, I've already been waiting for 3 years with this agent. It took me, right, I know. That's the state.
Not even next year, but
that's the state of trade publishing right now. It's pretty scary. Is if you're a nobody, they're going to throw you on the back burner so far that, like, by the time it comes, I won't even be excited about it anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I felt real weird about writing it, and even more so, I am selling the paperback of the book right now. It's a beautiful, beautiful book, and I'll later on give you some codes where you can get it cheaply. But I've had people I know that I went to church with 10 years ago who have bought copies of it that I'm going to mail out today after we're done talking. And
we'll see if they Holy Ghost you after that.
They will straight up. Yeah,
I just talked to the Naked Pastor, and his episode is fresh out now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of his cartoons was when you leave the church, you get Holy Ghosted.
So true. Yeah, and I do worry about it. So anybody who has bought it that I know is real super Christian-y, what I tell them, and I think that this is true, is that it's a really vulgar book with the main character who's hostile towards all organized religion. But at the bottom, the theme is like laying your life down for your friend. And if that's not super Christian-y, I don't know what theme would be more Christian-y. Greater love has this, that you lay down your life for your friend. And that's the book. I mean, that's a spoiler, and it's not a spoiler. You figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because we've already established there's multiple deaths.
Many deaths.
At this point, we could be talking about death 1, 7, 4.
Yes.
Yeah. So
or 45. No, wait a second.
Yeah, it's a never ending. You're just going to sell the rights, and people will keep writing the 37th life of Marva DeLonghi.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I don't know if I'm in for that, but yeah.
It'll be a James Patterson bookshot. Each life will be separately written by you and him, mostly you, but his name will be bigger.
Yeah. Hey, man, I'll be a whore for money sometimes.
Yeah, right. That's one of those things where if somebody was like, man, would you do that? Would you co-write a book with James Patterson? I'd be like,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it would pay for my house, and probably I could buy a new car and
right.
just do what I really want to do, at least for a couple of years. So yeah, exactly. I probably would.
It's a great on-ramp. Exactly. And I think the one thing that anybody who's really serious about making a life in the arts, if you do get a couple of years to have an on-ramp and you're taken care of, most people could make it if they had that time.
Yeah.
Most people.
Well, there was a guy made a reel on Instagram, and I'm sure it's on TikTok too. That's your favorite actors have rich parents. Your favorite singers have rich parents.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like that thing, like, I don't, more or less he says, I don't belittle you for having rich parents, but it's easy to focus on your art when you don't ever have to worry about rent.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Which, goes back to what you said. If you can find an avenue where maybe you don't feel like, oh, this was the most artistic decision, but it's like, well, you can make a lot of artistic decisions after you make that monetary decision.
I think so, yeah. And I think some of my very favorite writers all do that kind of stuff. Ray Bradbury is famous for writing a ton of just commercial, super commercial type of stuff so that he could write those few artistic books like Fahrenheit 451. You know, I mean, he wrote a ton of stuff that you would probably look at and be like, oh, wow, that's like, you know, way too commercial for my artsy tastes or something. But like there's so many artists who do that. I think there's musicians who do that as well, who pump out a novel. Haruki Murakami, do you know him?
Oh, you know what? I've seen that name before. 100%. I haven't read though.
Actually, look at this. It's Murakami. I'm wearing Murakami right now. That's how I feel about it. For all of you folks who don't watch this, even if this is watchable, I'm wearing a cat shirt with Haruki Murakami radio on it. He's a Japanese author. He wrote 1Q84. He wrote Norwegian Wood, and that's the one that I'm talking about. He had been putting books out for quite a while and hadn't really had any success. He's a jazz enthusiast, and he decided, I'm going to write something commercial and try to make my run at it. He wrote Norwegian Wood, obviously based on the Beatles' Norwegian Wood, and it's kind of his take on it, and it got him so popular that he's a big deal.
Okay, so
go commercial, people. Okay,
and write a book that has a Beatles song title.
That does kind of seem like a theme in this conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Last story, Beatles.
Actually, somebody else I know, a guy that has a podcast, did an episode of his podcast, and he titled it "The Power of Love," and he said that it got like hundreds of hits on Spotify in one day because people were probably searching for the song.
Yes. You know what? I'm going to steal that. I'm going to take the most popular song titles and title all of my podcast episodes that way. I'll report back to you and let you know how it goes.
Yeah. Specifically on Spotify too. You gotta go where people are getting music.
Perfect.
Yeah. So that's the hack, people. Go forth and make podcasts with song lyrics. I'm trying to remember. You told me that you had written specifically this book that we're talking about now, because you've got several books, but this one, you wrote it and, you know, I do air quotes again, finished it when?
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean,
because you've sat on it for a while because you had an agent who was trying to get you, you know, one of those elusive big 5 deals, I'm sure. And then, you know.
Yeah. So, I started it in 2014. The book, first draft, the one I was talking about with the Africanized lice, started in 2014. I started subbing it in March of 2019. Annie picked me up in April of 2019.
Can we expand that just a little bit? Because you're the first person that I've actually asked this. I've had a couple of people I could have. What was your process in getting an agent like? Was it fairly quick, or did that in itself take a year, or what?
No, that was fast. If you only count that book, I had a book called The Stories of Bogey. It was my thesis for graduate school. I'm so proud of that book. I will only publish that book traditionally because it's literary fiction. If you've read Karl Ove Knausgaard, it's a lot like his My Struggle books, but more fictionalized. Also, Brad Listy, great podcast, Other People, if you're looking for like a literary podcast. He wrote a book called Be Brief and Tell Me Everything. It's similar to that. Well, it's my own life, but I braid into it Bogey, which I guess Easter egg. Lyle Kapuchnik is a character in The Stories of Bogey. He's Bogey's childhood best friend. So it is part real, part fiction, but even the fiction part is just borrowing my own life and telling it as childhood stories. So it's kind of like switching between the current and the past, and giving me a little bit of liberty to make it more fun to read. But that is to say, I made a good friend in a gentleman named Joe Salvatore, who came to do a traveling workshop at school, and he really loved what I was writing, and he introduced me to an agent friend of his in New York, and that was in 2014. So that book had been finished for a while, or close to finished for a while at that point. Aaron Harris, and Aaron did not want the book. And so I shopped it for a little bit longer, and I was getting so many no's that I finally just said, if it's not good enough for like a warm introduction to get through the door, it needs more work, or I need a bigger name. And that's how 9 Lives came about, is from that failure. So from there, you could say it took me 5 years to get an agent, but I didn't shop anything between 2000, probably like early 2015 to when I started shopping in 2019. And when I got Annie, she was literally the second agent that I submitted to, because if you go to, I think it's either agentquery.com or querytracker.com. I can't remember which one. It's one of the two of those. You can alphabetize all of the agencies, and then you just click on them and read, do they read your kind of thing? Are they open for submissions, X, Y, Z? She was second on the list alphabetically at that point that fit the criteria. I sent out 50 query letters, but I would have only had to send out 2. So, yeah.
That sounds like you. I did way more than I had to do.
Yeah. So,
and I mean that in a loving way.
I understand that, and I thank you very much for it. If I can be proud of myself for anything, it's like not taking no for an answer.
I say you're nothing if not prepared and tenacious.
Yes, exactly. Oh, it's awful.
Which is funny for an introverted guy. Does the fire within overcome the introvertedness, or do you just become a different person kind of in your head when you have to go into like time to talk to people, especially when it's, something like the book or the podcast, something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I don't talk about this a lot, and I'm not necessarily going to say which one of them, but I have a son who has autism. And when I watch him move through the world, he is like, his behavior is so reminiscent of the way that my own brain works that sometimes I wonder if I was maybe just like on the lower end of the spectrum or something. Like when you talk about obsessions, when you talk about having to like more learned behavior with filters and stuff like that, I kind of wonder. I've never got it tested. I have no desire to get it tested, but I do have this ability to kind of compartmentalize my natural self in order to be a different self for this situation. And that feels like a learned behavior. I had all sales jobs from the time I got married. And even earlier on, I was in a lot of like retail sales jobs where you earned money based on your sales, not just an hourly wage. And when you do that, you have to be kind to people. You have to be engaging. You have to tell funny stories. And for whatever reason, I've had this ability to just kind of turn off my preferences and be like the gregarious, like, hey, buy a 2022 Honda Odyssey, like, check out these sweet features. That's not how you do it, but I'm just sort of, this is the way brain to do these things, I guess.
No, I wanted to see the Odyssey.
Yeah, damn straight you did.
Yeah.
It's a weird time of year where it's too hot to wear a hat, but too cold to not.
Yeah. As soon as you step outside, you're like, it's cold. But then once you're inside, it's greenhouse effect. I'm trying to think what more there might be to talk about besides, tell people where they can find the book.
Yeah. So I would prefer that everybody buys their books off of www.jodyjsperling.com. J Sperling is SP as in Paul, ERLI, N as in Nancy, G.com. All the books there are cheaper than you can find them anywhere else. And the cool thing is, because I have my own bookstore, I get 97% of the profits. So instead of going through Amazon, you get the same thing, and you can still read it on your Kindle. You can still listen to it on your Kindle or your Audible or whatever, if it's an audiobook, all of those things. And I did come prepared for this. So what I'm pushing harder than anything else is I was able to convince the illustrious and most beautiful voice in audiobooks, X.E. Sands. You can look her up if you're interested, to read all 9 books in the Luke and Time Mysteries. So she's going to have the first two ready for me in June of 2023. So just a few months from now, she'll have those books recorded, and it's expensive. So I am offering right now, to offset the payment that I'm going to be paying when the bill comes due in June, $10 for the first two audiobooks. And I will get that code to you, Chris, so that you can offer that to your audience. Cool. You don't get them till June, but if you buy them right now, you get two audiobooks for $10. That's the cheapest way that you can get two of those books that is available to the average person. And even if you don't listen to audiobooks, Xe Sands she's great. She read for Chuck Wendig. She read for, I can't think of his name right now. He's a sci-fi guy, but I mean, some like fairly big names. I
say you had me at Chuck Wendig.
Exactly.
I'm a Chuck fan.
I'm a huge Chuck fan. Chuck Wendig, I love you. He's the only heir apparent I can think of to Stephen King, honestly. I've been looking for somebody that captures me the same way, and Chuck does it. He's so good. But so she read for him. That's where I think I finally connected. So I thought it was a long shot. I shot an email, or no, actually I found her on Twitter, and I sent her a message on Twitter. And I said, hey, I'm guessing you don't accept indie authors, but I've got this foul-mouthed female detective character who would be perfect for you. And I wanted to know, would you ever consider reading? And so she got together with me. We talked for a little while, and she's like, yeah, let me send it over to my producer and see what we can do. And so that was an amazing, unexpected, really wonderful thing. But it is pricey. Like it's not like you get somebody great and then they're cheap to work with. So either way, I'm doing this. I can't afford it, but I would love to offset that cost and give away a ton of audiobooks almost free. I mean, $10 for two audiobooks is ridiculous. You can't even get a month of Audible for that much. So there you go.
You're crazy, Jody.
I'm a wild man.
So, okay. I'll edit this out if I need to, because maybe you don't want to give away everything. But how are you doing the book printing then?
Yeah, no, so that's actually I'm not giving anything away. I'm going to be doing an offset run with Maple Press, which I can give you the details for, or anybody who is indie and wants to have like a book that feels like you buy at Barnes & Noble. There's a press called Maple Press that does offset runs. You do have to print a large number of copies. So per copy, a cost from Maple Press is going to be, and this is a 303-page book, but it's going to be about $2.48.
Oh, wow. Versus Amazon, which would probably cost close to like $6, right?
My Amazon books right now cost $507 after shipping. So each copy that I buy from Amazon is $507 as an author copy. And that's what I'm doing right now. Because, I'm not quite ready for the offset printing, but to do offset, you have to have a lot, and you need to actually reach out to them and say, what is the exact print number? Because if you're one book short or one book too many, your shipping costs astronomically raise and make it much less perfect. So the way that offset runs is it does an exact number of books, and as long as you do a multiple of that exact number of books, then you get this ridiculously cheap shipping cost and print cost. If they have to waste a bunch of paper to print one extra book, they're going to charge you a ton for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
well, you shouldn't have a problem, man. I've sold probably close to 150 paperbacks. So yeah. And you're better at selling things than I am. People barely know I exist. I have to find people who have large Twitter accounts and make a splash that way.
Yeah. Off camera, let's talk about some things that have been working well for me. I haven't sold a ton of books, but yeah, I've been really like outgoing about trying to reach out to some TikTokers, because I'm like, I'm not gonna.
Oh, that's a really good idea, and I got something I can talk to you about that off air too. But keep in mind too that somebody, it was Naked Pastor, he was telling me that with his art stuff and with other people talking about their writing specifically, your career is going to be shaped like a hockey stick. In that, when you start, it's going to be like a flat line, and then with each thing you do after that, it just.
Yeah, absolutely. If you listen to my podcast called TRPM, and I would really encourage you to start with my interview with. I'm having a horrible time with names right now. I can see her face perfectly. God darn. Well, Chris will put it in the show notes because I can't think of her name right now. But she is a trade published author, and basically what she said to me is just write books. The more books you write, like you become a force. And
wait, was that Libby?
Thank you, Libby Grant. Thank you.
Libby
God
Grant.
dang.
There you go.
my brain is really busted right now. Yeah, Libby Grant. I would point anybody to that episode because I got some feedback that people were like, I didn't really like all of her like artsy fartsy stuff. And I was like, give me a break. She's as like hardcore sales as it gets. And I loved her message. She changed the way I thought about book marketing.
Yeah. I listened to that one, and I think I was one of the people that was like, I don't love every part of her message, but you can't deny that she's killing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's true. I wonder if you and I dug into it, or the other people who listened and felt the same way, if it comes down to the fact that you might not love the way that I think about it either. Because there is part of me that's sort of mercenary for the money. Like, I'll do things that I love. I
think, and I talk about this on the podcast with a lot of people, might as well talk about it with you too, is there's this inner push to be an artist and don't compromise. You know what I mean? But then there's also the world of where people make money, and if you've got to find the balance between the two.
Yeah.
And so when I heard her talk, I was like, man, this is just, it sounds so business-like and so like calculated that it made me kind of forget some of the joy part of like why I do it in the first place. But, you know, even if that's how you feel listening to her, maybe that's not how she feels. And also when you're listening to stuff like that, you can take what's good and apply that to yourself, and you don't have to take every part of it.
What works for you. Yeah. And so I will kind of summarize her message. What stuck with me, and it might be the only part because other people maybe heard different things than I did. She said, I get to wake up in the morning, write for 5.5 hours, and the rest of the day I can smoke pot, sit out and watch the beach and read books. And I was like, that's the life I should have had. I don't need to work 30 hours every day, which has been my mentality for my entire life as a Christian person who was raised in the church, that like hard work is next to godliness or something. Like I thought if I work longer than everybody, that's what gives me value as a human being. And hearing her say that, like, I don't even like smoking pot, but I would absolutely love to have 5 hours of hard work and the rest of the day is mine. And work that I love, by the way. Like, I love writing. So
yeah. Well, someday it's going to be you and me. We'll sit down, we'll write for 5.5 hours, and then I'll smoke a joint, you'll drink a beer, and we'll talk and just hang out.
Damn straight. I look forward to it. Awesome, man.
What a good place to end. Me and Jody sitting on a beach writing, getting stoned, him getting a buzz.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man. Absolutely.
That's a fun place for me to end anyway. All right. Well, Jody, don't leave. I'm going to end this recording. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you as a guest and as a friend, and now as a writer too. I honestly had no idea if it was going to be any good, and then I'd have to look at you and be like, yeah, man, I like it. But I actually do really like the book, and I'm going to go finish it today. Thank you, sir. I don't say that enough to people when I meet them, because I think part of me is like, whoa, man, be cool. Be cool. Don't be like, oh my God, I love your book so much. How'd you do that? But at the same time, you know, be like, yeah, man, I really liked your book. And I did. So thank you. I want to make sure that I that doesn't escape the conversation here, that you did write a really good book that I did enjoy, and will continue to enjoy later. Thank you. Yeah, man. All right, everybody. That was Jody J. Sperling, author of The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi, a book that I just finished, and I love it. I highly recommend it. And I also recommend you check out his podcast, TRBM. I've been on there a couple times, but you don't have to listen to more of me if you don't want to. Check out Jody. Listen to his podcast, TRBM. Go out and check out The 9 Lives of Marva DeLonghi. I always want to say Margaret. I don't know why. And check him out at jodyjsperling.com. I'll put all the links for everything in the notes. Thank you all so much for stopping by. I really appreciate you. Stop by Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter and hit me up at Talon Writes. Please. Damn it. All right, guys. Love you. See you next time. Mwah.
And there you have it. This is the end of the podcast, the special music. Talk to you again on Monday. The end.